Welcome to the podcast, Leslie. It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast, and I'm excited to dive in to your product and all the details behind your launch and what you're doing with Vitaminis.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. It's such a privilege to talk to moms who are doing great things and grand things and who can inspire us and give us some insight and some actionable tips. So I'm sure we're going to get a lot of that from today's episode.
Hopefully.
Yeah, no, you're doing amazing stuff and you did it under a lot of restrictions. So, which we're going to dive into, which is really inspiring. So, why don't you give us some of your background and help us learn about what inspired you to launch Vitaminis?
Yeah, so I have always been interested in nutrition just personally.
Hmm.
And I think it goes all the way back. So my dad was the one who used to prepare meals at our house. My mom traveled for work, and my dad is not a cook. So it would basically be like, we need a meat, we need a veggie. He was a scientist. It was like, we need a meat, we need a veggie, we need a carb. And it was like a math equation. And I still think about food that way. I love good food, but I'm not like a foodie in the sense that I'm like, oh, the taste and the flavors. It's more like the components of nutrition. And so that's always been part of just my thought process. And then coupled with that, I hadn't been into supplements way back when, but when I started to have kids, you take prenatal supplements and you start to get into that, and pills will make me nauseous. And so I started researching about that and finding out that, in fact, vitamin pills have a lot of additives and they can be hard to digest. So that's apparently a common theme. And then as I've just have more kids and thinking about other people's nutrition, I've learned a lot more about how hard it is to get your nutritional needs met through food alone for a number of reasons. Produce doesn't have the nutrients it used to because of industrial farming and things like that. And then if you eat processed foods, which we all do, it's just part of life, that prevents your body from absorbing things. And so that coupled with the pill problem, and then I looked at gummy vitamins, and it's like the kids love those, but gummy vitamins actually don't hold the vitamins very well, which is why a lot of them suggest taking 4 or 6 at a time. And I now have 4 kids. So it's like you're dumping out candy, like everybody grab a handful of candy. Just something felt wrong about that. It all came together when I got laid off during the pandemic. And it was like a combination of being home with the kids, the daycare's closed, I was home, wasn't working, in charge of meals, combined with knowing there was pandemic going on. We need to make sure our needs are met, our immune systems are healthy, combined with the problems I'd had with supplements. And I skipped over that I worked in the beverage industry for a while, and it all just clicked at some point.
Hmm.
I was looking for a new job. No one was hiring. And I was like, you know what? I have this idea. I'm just going to start playing around with it. So that's really how it came about.
I love that. And I love that as moms, who my listeners often are, we're trying to take care of our families and take care of ourselves. But we have an entrepreneurial mindset. And we often think that we can't start our business or pursue our idea. So you had the pandemic that you started this in, but then you were also 8 months pregnant when
Yeah.
this launched. So tell us about that and
Yeah.
how you just.
A couple things. So during the pandemic, I had my 3 boys, they're 18 months apart, and I had been bugging my husband about a fourth kid. And he was like, no way. I got enough stuff. And I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be fun? He's like, no. But when the pandemic hit, we moved to the suburbs. We were in the city. We moved to the suburbs and things got a little easier. And it started to become more open-minded about that. Meanwhile, I started thinking of this idea, and I had just started working on the idea when I found out I was pregnant. So it was like one of those timing things where maybe if I had gotten pregnant sooner, I might have told myself, oh, I can't do this right now. It's not a good time or whatever, but I'd already started. So what I did was I set the clock ticking for myself. Hey, this baby's coming in 9 months. Like, you got to
Right.
get this thing off the ground, at least in some sense, so that it can see if it works while you go into that newborn phase. And as a fourth kid too, it's a lot easier by the time you get to their fourth kid dealing with the newborn. So I knew what it was going to entail. It's not
Right.
easy by any means, but
Sure.
I'm not sure I would have tried to pull that off with my first.
Yeah, the first is definitely probably one of the biggest shifts that you can have. It's just really what? Nothing
Yeah,
can
and you try
prepare
to
you
do
for
everything
that.
perfectly. I remember I tried to do
Right.
everything perfectly with my first, and by the time you get your fourth, you're like, okay, I know what's important, what's not important. Pretty
Exactly. And you
fine.
have assistants too, right? Oh my gosh. So, in the midst of all of this, you had to build partnerships and you had to get a sense of what the market wanted. So, can you walk us through on how you put all of that together to bring this to launch at such a quick time?
Yeah, and on that note, I should clarify, like your prior question, you were saying like how did you get to actually doing this, launching a business? Because you're right, a lot of times in your mind, it's I can't launch a business. I will say when I started, I did not say that to myself. I said, "Oh, I'm just gonna do a little research and now I'm just gonna test some
Hmm.
stuff out." And it was always so incremental that I felt comfortable. If it doesn't work, if this doesn't yield anything, it's fine. So it's like little
Right.
increments that ended up adding up. I think if I had said to myself, okay, you're going to start a business, you're going to be working on it for years, you're going to sink all this money. If I had like really looked at the whole scope of it, it would have probably have been too overwhelming. So I'll just clarify that because I really think that is the secret sometimes. It's just doing a tiny thing, just try that little thing. But to your question, that's how it started. So in the research phase, I started with interviewing friends and family. So I just wrote up an interview guide. So these are people I talk to all the time, but it was like, no, we're not going to have a chit chat. I actually have an interview guide. It was like a document. And I asked them things like, what are some challenges you face with your nutrition? What do you like about the products that are out there today? What do you not like? What do you look for when you buy something? Do you read the label? This interview guide, and I probably interviewed 40 or 50 friends and family and wrote notes in my documents and saved them on my computer. So it was a lot of work, but it cost me $0. I was unemployed, I'd been laid off. And even if I had been working, I probably could have done that in the evenings. I put the kids to
Hmm.
bed and call someone. That's how it started. And all those conversations ended up crystallizing with my own thoughts into an idea.
Hmm.
And then what I did was I just started researching beverage, like how a beverage is made. And I found some other entrepreneur groups and poked around and asked questions and ended up finding a beverage formulator, basically a food scientist to help me. And I
Hmm.
did end up paying him to help me develop the formula, but it was a small enough amount of money, again, that I could justify, do I want to just throw this money away? Of course not. But if nothing comes of it, I'll survive. Like that's the thought.
Hmm.
And then that was just one thing led to another.
Hmm. I love that. And I think that is so important to not get so overwhelmed by how big it is to actually launch something and to think about it incrementally. I think that's a really great strategy to just allow yourself to begin and take the right next step. So
Mhm.
you're not thinking about too much at once to get overwhelmed because that's so easy to do.
Yeah,
That is really so were those things that you had done in your job? A
little bit.
little
The
bit?
interviewing, yes. I had worked as
Uh-huh.
a consultant, so I was
Mhm,
familiar with that. But the actual formulation, no, that was
mhm,
new, which is
mhm,
why I knew I needed a food scientist. I knew I needed
mhm,
somebody who understood how the mixing would work, what I could make shelf stable, like
mhm,
what kind of packaging I should look at.
mhm,
But I had worked in the beverage industry. I actually worked in the alcohol industry. So
mhm,
it's funny, when I was there, we saw all sorts of research come across around functional food and beverage, clean label, better for you, nutrition, wellness. And I knew in that business we were never going to act on that stuff, but I just sort of started filing it away, taking
mhm,
note. And so I had some of that background, but the actual technical doing it, I had never
mhm,
done.
mhm. And I think that's an amazing point too, is just knowing when you need to bring in that expert because sometimes we can think that we can do it all ourselves or we should be able to do it all ourselves. It's really critical to be able to go, okay, now's the time to bring in the expert.
Right.
So I think that's a great point too. So during this time, what were some of the challenges and how did you navigate it with the manufacturing? So you got the formula and then yeah, how did you proceed?
So it was a lot of just legwork.
Yeah.
Honestly, so once I knew it was going to be a beverage, I knew it was going to be a shot. I actually evolved to the shot so that we could use it for shipping. I
Mm-hmm.
knew I wanted it to be shelf stable so that we could do e-commerce. So once I had all these parameters, then I had to go out and find who could actually make this stuff. A lot of co-packers, as we call them, can do shelf stable full-size beverages.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are many out there that can do like fresh pressed juice shots. You might see those like ginger shots and that kind of thing. But there aren't that many that can do shelf stable and shot size bottles on the machines. And that was just a lot of legwork, finding lists of co-packers, calling, narrowing down, sending a lot of web form inquiries. Hey, Leslie, whatever. And then once I'd done all that filtering, I think I ended up with maybe 5 co-packers that could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came down to convincing them to do it because a lot of these companies, they are producing thousands and thousands, maybe even millions of bottles for big brands. And you're basically trying to convince them to stop that, put your tiny little unknown brand on and make some of it. And a lot of them have minimum quantities. Like that's not worth our time unless you're going to make a ton of it. So you have to negotiate that. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a little bit surprising and challenging in the sense that naively, I thought, oh, this is a really cool new product. They're going to be all fighting for it. No, it was me selling. Like I had to
Mm-hmm.
really convince them. And a lot of it was about me. Like I had to convince them that I had a good idea, that I was going to grow this business and it was worth their time. That was a challenge. And it's funny when you said, what were some of the challenges in the early days? The first thing that came to my mind was my own comfort level with putting myself out there. That was a big challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
When I had the idea on paper, it was like, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea. Is anyone going to want to buy this? Is this even a good idea? Just that self-doubt stuff. It was very
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable to put it out into the world and just some people are going to like it, some people aren't going to like it. And like looking back, it's silly, but I remember that being like quite painful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a very difficult hurdle for anyone to get over. I don't know if I've ever talked to anybody who's, oh, that was nothing. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, maybe it is. But you look at other
yeah.
people, you think they don't have that, right? You're like, oh,
That is, yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that's really what the hurdle is actually, is not so much putting yourself out there, but is the comparison that you think other people don't struggle with it. Yes, for sure.
yeah, it's hard. And you're like, if it's such a struggle, maybe it's not a good idea. Or maybe I'm not cut out for it. Or it's no, maybe that's just how it is.
Hmm. No, I love that because you wouldn't look at your website or your social media and say, oh, she struggles with putting herself out there. It's so, I love that you brought that up because it is definitely something that everybody struggles with. I think that, or everybody I've talked to, myself included, it's so tough. So, what was there something that helped you get over that?
I just knew there was no other option. It was like I had this idea. I personally thought it could be interesting.
Hmm.
Either I just scrap it and give up on it, or I put it
Hmm.
out there. And it was like I couldn't quite justify, oh, I'm just going to give up because I'm uncomfortable. Well, that I know enough to know that's not a good excuse. When
Right.
you once I'm a little bit further on in life, like I was a
Hmm.
little bit later starting a company than some people, but I'd been around enough in jobs and different school settings to know that if you're pushing yourself, it is uncomfortable but it's okay. So I knew that. So I really didn't feel like I had a choice. I was like, I just get over it. So I remember when first posted on LinkedIn, like my actual idea, I like clicked like post and then I like ran away and I was like, I gotta like go for a walk or something, but I was out there.
Right. Yeah, no. And I think too, one of the suggestions I've heard is to make a big investment, or at some point you've invested enough time and effort and spoke to manufacturers and whatnot. There's no going back now.
That is so true. You're right. And I've had a couple people ask me at times, like, how do you like just keep going? And it's what choice do I have? And I've actually heard from, I know someone who teaches entrepreneurship, and they said at any given time, you either have money or hope. If you have money and hope, you're great. If you have money and no hope, you can keep going. If you have no money, but you have hope, you can go scramble up the money. And if you don't have hope or money, then it's over. But if you got one or the other, you have to
Mhm.
keep going. You can't walk away.
No, I love that. And that's so true. Once you have the hope and the money, you're
Then you're good.
golden.
Then you're golden.
And it's every new level, you're going to run into new hurdles. There's always something else that you have to overcome. And that requires usually great leadership. And so I would love to hear some of the leadership challenges and maybe some of the strategies that you've had to put together in progressing with Vitaminis.
Yeah, so it's funny because I am the only employee at Vitaminis, but leadership takes a lot of different forms. And when you ask that question, the first thing I thought of is having this vision for a clean product with no preservatives, nothing artificial, no added sugar. I knew that's what I wanted, but I really had to push that a lot. And I
Mhm.
realized that the industry is set up in a certain way where that's just accepted and normal. And it took a lot of, no, this is what I want. This is what I want. To give you an example, the formulator, I've now worked with two formulators. This happened in both cases for both products where I said, here's what I want. Clean, no this, no that, blah, blah, blah. And what they sent me back had stuff in it. So I opened it, the samples, and I'm like, oh, this is so delicious. Wow, this is really sweet. And then I'm like looking at the ingredients. It's wait, there's erythritol or artificial flavor. Did we talk about this? And then in the calls with them, they would say, you have to add sugar. If you don't add sugar, no one's going to drink it. And it takes a lot to really stick to it because I didn't work in this particular space before. I did work in the
Mhm.
alcohol industry, but
Mhm.
there's always that part of you that's they're the experts. Maybe they're right. Maybe it has to have that.
Mhm.
And I'll even admit there were times I'm like, okay, maybe. And then the next day you wake up, you're like, no, it's not the vision. So that's the first
Yeah.
thing that comes to me is in terms of leadership challenge is if you're going to do something different than what's out there, it will require a lot of friction. It will involve a lot of people telling you they don't get it. It'll involve a lot of people telling you that's not going to work. And that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It just comes with the territory of doing something different.
Mhm. I think that's such a great story. And honestly, as a mom who's constantly looking for things for myself and my children without a bunch of preservatives and sugar, it seems like everything has so much sugar in it. It's crazy. I
Yeah,
appreciate you standing
everywhere.
up and saying, look, I want to make this product because it's definitely something that my family is always looking for. so,
Yeah.
so
And it's
that's
got to taste
great.
good, but not with all that stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is such a challenge and it makes you wonder who's setting the benchmark for the products. Is it really the people or is it the manufacturers or and two, it sounds like you at some point consciously or subconsciously you took time to establish what you wanted to create, what was important to you, and what your non negotiables were. And I think no matter what you're creating, whether it's a physical product or something that's not tangible, you have to do that as an entrepreneur at some point. Because then you're just going to bend to whatever it is that somebody else is going to want and then it seems like every marketplace is so crowded and to distinguish yourself you have to establish how you're different. I think that's a great story and so important.
There's so many opinions out there. You're always going to get the opinion. So you have to make sure, like within yourself, that you
Mhm,
really believe in it because the amount of friction and effort,
mhm,
if you don't really believe in it, it's just
mhm.
not going to work.
It was funny for me. I anticipated like the opinions of maybe a customer or potential client. But when you have a business to business relationship, I really didn't anticipate that so much as a business owner. And you question your like you said, sometimes you go, "Oh, maybe they know better." But if you really do have that strong foundation, that's gonna help you so much in those moments.
Yeah.
I think
And you
that's a
always
great
have to
point.
remember what other people's incentives are, right? This quote might be just fine for them, but they're not the ones
Mhm.
that are going to be championing this brand and putting their face on it. And so, yeah,
Right.
it is, you have to take a step back sometimes. And like I said, there have been times in conversations, I'll get pushed in a different direction, but then I have to come back and center myself and realize, wait,
No,
yeah,
I think that's a wonderful, such a helpful point for any entrepreneur. And so I'm so glad you made that point. So, yeah, like anybody listening to this podcast, what is like a takeaway? What is like a message that you would like to give to moms who are wanting to start their own business?
yeah. Oh man, I would say we talked about it, but I would say don't underestimate the little things. As a mom, there's so many demands on your time. You're so busy, but even carving out 5, 10, 15 minutes a day to think
Mm,
about what you want, envision what you want, do a little bit of research, that can really add up. So I think of it like almost like any big goal you have. If you can break it down into tiny steps, it all adds up. Everything is always a sum of tiny things.
mhm,
So that's the one thing. I think that the conversation that we had about being uncomfortable is good to remember. It's okay to be doubtful. If you
mhm.
have doubts, it doesn't mean it's not good. It's just part of it. But along with that, I would say have your support system. And I feel like self-care is such a buzzword these days. And honestly, I don't think I really knew for a while what that actually meant, but now I do get it. It's what are those things that are going to refresh you, relieve your stress, whether it's working out, spending time in nature, whatever it is for you, you really do have to make time for that because especially in entrepreneurship, there's so much pressure, so much chaos. If you don't do that, you could reach a breaking point. Like you could lose it. You could like just exhaust yourself or burn out or whatever. And that would be my other tip. And it's hard too as a mom. You're like, well, I have my kids to worry about and I'm investing in this business. Like I can't possibly justify anything else for myself. But the reality is when you take care of yourself, you will be better for your kids and your business and everything else.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think if you have owned a business long enough, if you don't think about that at the outset, at some point, your
You
body
realize.
will make you. Yeah. And so one other thing I would love to hear about too is as moms, we're not creating our businesses in a vacuum. We're also trying to take care of our families and ourselves, as you mentioned. So I love to hear how creating your business has affected you as a mom. Have you had to find a way to balance it all differently than working a corporate job?
Yes. Yeah, it's different and there's pros and cons to everything. In a corporate job, it's very easy to carve out like 9 to 5 or whatever, or have to do these things. When it's your own business, it's a little bit more fuzzy where I would like to get this done, but I don't necessarily need to get it done today. I could do this other thing. And that's good and bad, right? Like on the good
Mhm.
side, there have been times where if I want to be the mystery reader at the first grade, I can carve out that time and do it. I don't have to get anyone's permission. But on the other hand, you got to draw a line somewhere you never make the progress you want to. Pros and cons, but I will say there is nothing that makes me happier than when my kids, like taking my kids to the grocery store and pointing out Vitaminis on the shelf, and they just think it's so cool that their mom did that. It makes me realize how cool it is, like through their eyes. And that's been just tremendously rewarding. And maybe some people have that in working for other people, depending on what they're working on. But for me, that was a new experience that I was really proud of.
No, that is so awesome when you hear your children reflect back to you how they perceive what you're working on. Yeah, no matter what it is, but especially when it's part of your business, it's so rewarding. So you mentioned going to the grocery store and seeing Vitaminis. Where can we find it? Where can listeners connect with you to learn more about it?
Yes. So in terms of physical retail, we're mostly in the Midwest. We're at Fresh
Mhm.
Time and also the Fruitful Yield. I am working hard at getting some more
Yeah.
brick and mortar retailers, hopefully nationally someday. That's the dream.
Mhm.
And then we're online. So vitaminisbrand.com is our website. And then we are also on Amazon. If you search for Vitaminis, you might have to put in Vitaminis juice so you don't end up with vitamin brands, but we are there.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to try it. And I will definitely let the listeners know. Because we are always looking for these products. So I love that a mom is behind it. And I love supporting moms in their businesses and their entrepreneurial dreams. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been wonderful connecting with you.
Thank you for making this platform to inspire people
Yeah.
and for having me on.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Leslie.